Chapter 1. The Forgotten Forest. Beyond the edge of the village lay a mysterious expanse known as the Forgotten Forest. This ancient place was shrouded in darkness, its trees towering so high that they blotted out the sky, casting shadows even during the brightest days. The forest was not just feared for its sheer vastness but for the legend that haunted it, a story whispered among the villagers since time immemorial. They spoke of a monstrous beast, a jet-black panther with eyes like glowing embers and claws so sharp that they could tear through metal. Those who dared to enter the forest after sundown were said to vanish without a trace, leaving only their terrified whispers behind. The village was a simple place, home to hard-working farmers and artisans who valued their traditions and spoke in hushed tones whenever the subject of the forest came up. The elders would sit around the crackling fire at night, their voices low and serious as they told tales of the beast. They described how, under the pale light of the full moon, the creature would prowl through the forest, hunting with a deadly, silent grace. Children grew up both terrified and fascinated by these stories, warned never to stray too close to the forest's edge. Despite the warnings, some young men, driven by curiosity or bravado, would sneak close to the forest's borders. They'd peer into the dark thicket, their hearts pounding with the thrill of danger, but none were foolish enough to step inside. The silence of the forest was unnatural. Birds did not sing, and even the wind seemed hesitant to rustle the leaves. It was as though the forest itself knew something dark and terrible lived within. The most mysterious aspect of the beast was that it seemed to choose its victims carefully, appearing only during nights when the full moon lit up the sky like a watchful eye. The villagers noticed a pattern. The air would grow colder, and an eerie stillness would descend upon the land on the nights of a full moon. Livestock would become restless, dogs would whimper, and the old wooden doors of the cottages would creak as if warning their inhabitants to stay inside. To the villagers, the forest was not merely a place, it was a boundary between their safe, familiar world and the realm of the unknown. No one understood why the panther haunted them or where it had come from. Some believed it was a guardian of the forest, cursed to protect its secrets for eternity. Others thought it was the vengeful spirit of a forgotten warrior, bound to prowl the shadows. The most fearful whispers suggested that it was born from the darkness itself, a shadow given life and fury. One moonless night, a group of elders gathered in the village square. The small, flickering light of their lanterns seemed weak against the dark shroud that had enveloped their homes. Baba Noor, the oldest and most respected among them, recounted stories from his youth when the beast had last been sighted decades ago. His deep, gravelly voice echoed in the silence as he described eyes that glowed like fire and the sound of footsteps so soft they barely stirred the leaves. "It is not just a beast," he said, his eyes scanning the frightened faces in the crowd. "It is a spirit, a cursed guardian that feeds on the fear of those who cross its path." Despite the fear that gripped the village, no one knew exactly what had happened to those who disappeared. They spoke of an unending darkness, an unseen force that silenced even the most courageous hearts. This was the mystery that lay in the heart of the Forgotten Forest, where the beast waited, silent and watchful, for its next prey. Little did the villagers know, change was coming. The courage of one young hunter would soon test the boundaries of fear, unveiling truths that had been buried deep within the forest's shadows. Chapter 2. The First Encounter. The night was bathed in a ghostly silver glow as the full moon rose high above the Forgotten Forest. It cast long, eerie shadows across the village, making the familiar look foreign and the safe feel menacing. Inside a modest hut at the village's edge, Hamza, a young hunter known for his courage, prepared himself for a task that many would call reckless. His father's old rifle lay on the table, polished and gleaming, while a small torch flickered nearby. Hamza's dark eyes reflected both determination and the fear he dared not voice. For as long as he could remember, the stories of the beast had haunted his dreams. But unlike others, fear had not stopped him, it had spurred him on. He was tired of living under the shadow of the beast, tired of whispered warnings and worried glances. With a deep breath, he slung the rifle over his shoulder, picked up the torch, and stepped outside. The cool night air prickled his skin, and for a moment, he hesitated, looking back at the warm glow of his home. The thought of his mother's anxious eyes and whispered prayers pressed on his heart, but he pushed it aside. Tonight, he would face the darkness. The forest loomed before him like a living being, its trees swaying gently as though murmuring secrets. Each step Hamza took seemed louder than the last, the crunch of leaves underfoot echoing in the stillness. The deeper he went, the more the night swallowed him. The torchlight only illuminated a narrow path ahead, leaving the rest shrouded in mystery. The forest was eerily silent. No crickets chirped, no owls hooted. It was as if every living thing had decided to hold its breath. Suddenly, a faint rustling broke the silence. Hamza's heart leapt into his throat. He stopped, straining to listen, his fingers tightening around the rifle. The sound came again, this time closer, a quick, deliberate movement, unlike the casual scurrying of small animals. He turned, aiming the torch into the darkness, but it revealed nothing but the twisting forms of tree branches. Beads of sweat trickled down his temple. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to stay calm. "It's just the wind," he whispered, trying to convince himself. But deep down, he knew it was a lie. The stories said the beast moved like a shadow, silent until it chose to reveal itself. And now, the forest seemed to hold a collective breath as though anticipating what was to come. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Hamza caught a glimmer, 2 pinpoints of light, red as molten coals, staring at him from the shadows. His body went cold. He spun to face them, lifting his rifle, but his hands shook. The eyes didn't waver. They held him in a gaze that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. The beast stepped forward, muscles rippling beneath its midnight fur, so black it seemed to absorb the light. It was enormous, far larger than any panther he'd ever heard of, and more menacing than he could have imagined. Its low growl rumbled through the air, vibrating in Hamza's chest like the warning drumbeat of a storm. For a moment, neither moved. The beast studied him, its tail swaying slowly, a predator assessing its prey. Hamza's mind raced. He could feel the pulse of blood in his ears, could hear his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He knew he should run, but his legs felt like they were rooted to the spot. With a sudden burst of movement, the panther lunged. Hamza barely had time to pull the trigger. The shot rang out, splitting the night with its sharp cry, but the bullet missed, embedding into a tree behind the beast. The panther's claws raked across Hamza's arm, a searing pain that made him cry out and drop the torch. The light flickered wildly as it fell, casting chaotic shadows that danced around them. Hamza hit the ground, the world spinning. He braced himself for the final blow, the claws that would end him. But just then, a sound echoed through the trees, a scream, distant yet piercing enough to cut through the tension. The beast paused, ears twitching, eyes narrowing as it listened. In that heartbeat of distraction, it turned and vanished into the forest as suddenly as it had appeared, its form melting into the shadows. Breathing heavily, Hamza pushed himself up, pain coursing through his arm. The torch lay a few feet away, its flame sputtering but still alive. He grabbed it, the warm light a small comfort against the cold that clung to him. Stumbling, wounded but alive, he retraced his steps, every nerve still alert for the panther's return. The forest watched him go, silent as ever, holding onto its secrets. When Hamza finally emerged at the edge of the village, the first glimmers of dawn were breaking across the sky. The villagers rushed to him, their faces a mix of awe and fear as they listened to his tale. The panther was real, and now, more than ever, the forest seemed even more alive with danger. Chapter 3. The Village's Fear. The sun had barely risen, casting its pale light over the village when Hamza stumbled through its narrow streets, his arm bleeding and his body weary. The night had been long, and the darkness of the forest still clung to him, like a weight pressing down on his chest. He could still hear the growl of the panther in his ears, feel the sharpness of its claws on his skin. But as he approached the village, he found himself haunted by something even more terrifying, the fear in the eyes of his people. As he crossed the threshold of his home, his mother rushed to him, her face a mixture of relief and terror. "Hamza," she cried, her hands trembling as she touched the blood-soaked cloth around his arm. "What happened? Where have you been? The whole village is worried." "I saw it," he said, his voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. "The beast, it's real," his mother gasped, stepping back in shock. No, it can't be. The stories are true," Hamza interrupted. "I saw it with my own eyes. It's massive, more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. And it's not just a beast, it's something else, something more sinister." Word of Hamza's encounter spread like wildfire through the village. People gathered in small groups, murmuring in hushed tones. Some of the older villagers, those who had grown up hearing the legends, seemed less shocked, their faces etched with an unspoken understanding. But the younger villagers, those who had only heard the stories as fairy tales, were visibly shaken. Later that afternoon, a meeting was held in the village square. The council of elders, led by Baba Noor, convened with worried expressions on their faces. The air was thick with tension as they sat in a circle, their voices low and serious. Hamza stood before them, his eyes fixed on the ground. His injury had been bandaged, but the memory of the beast still burned in his mind. Baba Noor was the first to speak, his voice gravelly and filled with age-old wisdom. "We knew this day would come," he said, looking up at Hamza with a solemn gaze. "The creature has always been a part of the forest, lurking in its shadows. But it has never been this aggressive, not in my lifetime. There is something wrong. It's as if the balance between the forest and the village is being disturbed." A murmur ran through the group, and Hamza's mind raced with thoughts of the panther. He remembered its glowing eyes, its silent grace, and the way it had disappeared into the darkness as if it were part of the night itself. He knew that it was more than just a creature of flesh and bone. It was something ancient, something powerful, something that thrived on fear. One of the younger villagers, Aslam, stepped forward, his face pale. "But why now?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Why is the beast attacking us after all these years?" Baba Noor sighed deeply, his weathered face showing signs of age-old sorrow. "It is not just a beast, young man," he said slowly. "It is a spirit, a cursed spirit that was bound to the forest long ago. Many years ago, when the forest was young and full of life, there was a warrior who sought to protect these lands from invaders. But he was betrayed, and in his rage, he made a pact with a dark force, something that would grant him power beyond measure, but at a terrible cost. The warrior became the beast, cursed to roam these woods forever, bound to the land by the very darkness he had unleashed." Hamza listened intently, his mind trying to piece together the fragments of the story. The beast was not just a monster, it was the spirit of a fallen warrior, trapped in a form that thirsted for vengeance. "The spirit feeds on fear," Baba Noor continued, his eyes distant. "It is a creature born of hate, anger, and sorrow. It feeds on those who wander too close, on the fear of those who dare to challenge it. The more fear it consumes, the stronger it becomes. And once it has consumed enough fear, it will no longer be bound to the forest. It will destroy everything in its path." The weight of Baba Noor's words hung heavily in the air. The villagers exchanged worried glances, the fear in their hearts now more palpable than ever. They had always believed that the beast was just a myth, a story to frighten children, but now they knew it was real, and the consequences of its anger were unimaginable. "I have seen the beast," Hamza said quietly, his voice steady despite the fear that still gripped him. "I saw its eyes, and I felt its power. But there is one thing I don't understand: why is it coming now? What has changed?" Baba Noor's gaze softened, and he shook his head. "That, I do not know," he said. "But I fear that the time has come for the spirit to claim its final revenge. The balance has been disturbed. We cannot ignore it any longer." Hamza stood tall, determination burning in his chest. He knew what he had to do. The beast had attacked him once, but he wasn't afraid. Not anymore. He had come face to face with terror, and he had survived. Now, it was time to fight back, to end the nightmare once and for all. But to do that, he would need help. He would need the strength of his village, and most importantly, he would need to face the beast without fear, just as Baba Noor had warned. "I will end this," Hamza declared, his voice unwavering. "I will find a way to defeat the beast, no matter the cost." The village was silent, the weight of his words sinking in. The fear was still there, but so was the resolve. The time had come to confront the darkness, and Hamza was ready to lead the charge. The villagers nodded, their expressions a mixture of hope and fear. Together, they would face the beast, not with weapons alone, but with the courage to stand against the shadows that threatened to swallow them all. Chapter 4. The Plan. As the days passed, the fear that had once gripped the village began to shift into a quiet determination. The villagers knew they could no longer hide in the shadows, hoping the beast would lose interest. Hamza had survived his first encounter with the panther, but he could feel its presence still lurking in the forest, watching, waiting. The village could not afford to wait any longer. The time had come to act, and a plan was needed, one that would give them a chance to defeat the creature once and for all. The village elders convened once again, and this time, there was no hesitation in their eyes. Baba Noor, the eldest and most knowledgeable of them all, had lived through many years of stories and legends. He knew the forest's secrets, and he knew the power of the beast. But even he could not offer a solution that guaranteed victory. The only certainty was that fear would not be enough to defeat the panther. It had to be faced with courage, strategy, and something more, a force greater than fear itself. Hamza stood at the center of the circle, his posture strong, his resolve as firm as it had ever been. Beside him stood Aslam, his closest friend, who had been by his side since childhood and knew the old forest legends better than anyone. Aslam had spent countless hours poring over the stories and ancient texts, searching for any clue that might give them an advantage. "We need to stop it before it grows any stronger," Hamza said, his voice steady. "The creature feeds on fear. The more fear we give it, the stronger it becomes. That's why we must confront it, not with weapons, but with something it cannot touch, our courage, our unity." Baba Noor nodded slowly. "You are right, young man. The beast cannot be defeated by force alone. But there is something we can use, something old, something powerful." "What is it?" Hamza asked, eager for any hope. "There is an ancient talisman," Baba Noor explained. "A relic passed down through generations, used by the elders to protect the village from dark forces. It holds the power to ward off evil, to weaken the creature by forcing it to face its true self. But it is not enough to simply carry the talisman. You must use it with pure intent, without fear, without malice." Aslam's eyes widened with realization. "The talisman," he exclaimed. "I've heard of it, but I thought it was just a story. It's said to have been lost long ago." Baba Noor's eyes grew distant. "It was lost to us, but it is still within the forest. Deep within the heart of the woods, where the spirit of the forest resides. If you are brave enough to retrieve it, it will give you the strength to face the beast." The elders fell silent as the weight of Baba Noor's words settled over the group. The talisman, lost for generations, could be the key to ending the terror that had plagued their village for so long. But the task ahead was not simple. The forest, with all its secrets and dangers, was no place for the faint of heart. Many had entered it over the years, seeking treasure, fame, or knowledge, but none had returned. And the talisman lay hidden, waiting for the one who was worthy enough to find it. "We cannot send just anyone," Baba Noor continued, his voice grave. "Only those who are pure of heart, who have the strength to face the darkness without giving in to fear, can succeed." Hamza stood straighter, his determination shining through. "I'll go. I will find the talisman. I've already faced the beast once, I'm ready to face it again." His words were met with silence. The villagers looked to one another, unsure of how to respond. They knew Hamza's courage was unmatched, but the task he proposed was daunting. The forest was no ordinary place, and the beast was no ordinary predator. "Aslam and I will go together," Hamza added, turning to his friend. "We've been through much together, and I trust him with my life. We will find the talisman and bring it back." Aslam nodded, his face set with determination. "I'll stand by you, Hamza. Whatever it takes." The two friends stood together, united in their resolve. The path ahead was uncertain, but they knew it was the only way to stop the beast. Baba Noor, seeing the unwavering courage in their eyes, finally nodded. "Very well," he said. "But know this will not be easy. The forest is full of danger, and the creature will not let you take the talisman without a fight. The beast will try to turn your fear against you, to make you doubt yourselves. But you must remember, do not fear it. The talisman will guide you, but you must be true to your heart." The preparations for the journey began that very night. Hamza and Aslam packed their supplies, rations, ropes, and tools, but most importantly, they took with them the memory of their village, their families, and the courage that had been passed down through generations. As they made their way toward the forest's edge, the full moon rose high in the sky, casting its eerie light over the darkened woods. The air was thick with tension, the forest holding its breath as the two young men stepped forward. Each step they took into the woods seemed to echo through the stillness. The night was alive with the sounds of unseen creatures, but it was the silence that unnerved them the most, the silence before the storm. The forest closed in around them as they ventured deeper, their hearts racing with both fear and anticipation. They had no way of knowing what awaited them, but one thing was certain: their journey had begun, and there would be no turning back. As they walked further into the heart of the Forgotten Forest, they knew that the path ahead was fraught with danger. But they also knew that this was the only chance they had to end the terror that had haunted their people for generations. The time had come to face the beast, not with weapons, but with something stronger: their courage and unity. Chapter 5. The Final Confrontation. The deep, foreboding silence of the Forgotten Forest pressed in on Hamza and Aslam as they made their way deeper into the heart of the woods. The moonlight filtered through the dense canopy above, casting pale beams of light onto the twisted, gnarled trees and thick underbrush. Every step they took felt heavier than the last, the air growing thicker with each passing moment, as though the very forest itself was holding its breath. Hamza's hand gripped the talisman tightly, its ancient power pulsing with a faint warmth that brought him a sense of purpose. He could feel the weight of his mission, the responsibility of saving his village and ending the terror that had haunted them for so long. Beside him, Aslam moved quietly, his eyes scanning the shadows, ever watchful. The forest was alive, but not in the way it should be. There was something else here, something dark, something that had been waiting for them. "We're getting close," Hamza whispered, more to himself than to Aslam. Aslam nodded, his face tense. "I can feel it too. The air is thick with something." They had followed Baba Noor's instructions to the letter. The talisman had led them this far, its pull growing stronger the deeper they ventured into the forest. And now, they had reached the clearing, the heart of the Forgotten Forest. A strange, unnatural stillness surrounded them as they stepped into the open space, the moonlight casting an eerie glow on the ground. At the center of the clearing stood an ancient stone altar, covered in moss and vines. Hamza approached it cautiously, the talisman in his hand now glowing faintly, responding to the power that radiated from the altar. This was where the spirit had been bound long ago, and this was where it would be confronted once and for all. As Hamza placed the talisman on the altar, the ground beneath them trembled, and the air seemed to shift, growing colder. The trees around the clearing creaked and groaned as if awakening from a long slumber, and a low, rumbling growl echoed from the shadows. The panther's presence was near. Hamza's heart pounded in his chest, but he steadied his breath. He had come this far. There was no turning back now. Then, the creature appeared. From the shadows, the panther emerged, its massive form moving with a fluid grace that belied its immense size. Its eyes, glowing like burning coals, locked onto Hamza and Aslam with an intensity that sent a chill through their bones. The beast's fur rippled with an unnatural darkness, as though it was part of the very night itself. Its growl resonated through the forest, sending a wave of fear through the air. But Hamza stood tall, holding the talisman in front of him, its power growing stronger with each passing moment. The panther circled them, its eyes never leaving Hamza. The beast's low growl reverberated through the clearing, its gaze predatory, its movements silent and predatory. It was as if the forest itself had fallen into a deep hush, waiting for what would come next. "You are not afraid," the beast's voice rumbled, deep and ancient, as if it came from the very earth itself. Hamza swallowed, his heart racing, but he stood firm. "I am not afraid of you. You are nothing but a spirit of darkness. A shadow." The panther's eyes flickered with something that almost resembled amusement. "You think the talisman can stop me? I am the forest's wrath, the curse of this land. I have lived for centuries, and I will live for centuries more. I don't need to stop you," Hamza said, his voice unwavering. "You were born of fear, but fear does not control me. It will not control anyone again." With a sudden, terrifying roar, the panther lunged at Hamza, its claws outstretched and its teeth bared. Time seemed to slow as the creature flew through the air, its power immense and unstoppable. But Hamza stood his ground, holding the talisman in front of him. As the panther neared, the talisman burst into a blinding light, its glow intensifying until it was all-encompassing. The beast's roar was cut off as the light struck it, forcing the creature to recoil in pain. The panther writhed and shrieked, its massive body flickering as though it were being torn apart by the light. For a moment, it seemed as if the creature would vanish entirely. But the forest shook with an earth-shattering roar, and the panther reappeared, more monstrous than before, its form now distorted and twisted with fury. "You cannot defeat me," the panther howled, its voice filled with rage. Hamza's grip tightened on the talisman. "I don't need to defeat you," he said, his voice steady. "I need you to see the truth. You are not a beast. You are a man who lost his way. You were once a protector of this land, but your rage and betrayal twisted you into something unrecognizable. I see you for what you are. You are not a monster. You are just lost." For a moment, the panther froze, its eyes wide with something akin to recognition. The growl in its throat faltered, replaced by a low, mournful sound. The creature seemed to shrink, its massive form flickering as if torn between its monstrous nature and the human spirit trapped within. Hamza stepped forward, holding the talisman high, its light now blazing with a purity that filled the entire clearing. The panther's form shimmered, the darkness around it dissipating. The forest seemed to hold its breath. "You are free," Hamza whispered, the words carrying a weight of finality. "Let go of the rage. Let go of the fear." With a final, piercing cry, the panther's form dissolved, its body turning to smoke and fading into the air. The clearing fell silent, the light from the talisman gradually fading. The forest seemed to exhale, the weight of centuries-old terror lifting. Hamza stood in the center of the clearing, his heart still racing but filled with a profound sense of peace. The battle was over. The beast was gone. Aslam approached him slowly, his eyes wide with awe. Did we do it?" Hamza nodded, the talisman now dim in his hand. "It's over. The curse is broken." The forest, once shrouded in darkness, now seemed to breathe in the fresh air of freedom. The villagers would be safe. And the Forgotten Forest, though still filled with mysteries, was no longer a place of terror. Hamza and Aslam turned back toward the village, the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon. The journey was complete. The beast had been defeated, not by strength, but by courage, unity, and the refusal to let fear control them. The legend had come to an end, and a new story was waiting to be told.